Adamsville that was named for another part-time farmer named John Adams. And Liz, I'm really proud to tell you my youngest daughter is about to go off to college, and she's majoring in sustainable agriculture. So the first time I went through this exhibit behind us, I came out and I asked Steve Lubar if today's generation of farmers in Little Compton will go down in the history books as our last. And neither of us really wanted to predict an answer. So just let the implications of that sink in for a moment. You could travel the entire coastline of New England, all 556 miles of it, and you would pass through one coastal community to the next. You might find some, not many, communities that could rival Little Compton for its unspoiled beauty, but I would say that what makes Little Compton unique is we're one of the last farming communities in southern New England, and one of the last places in all New England outside the state of Maine where you can see sailors and farmers in the same zip code. Would Little Compton be Little Compton without farming? Last year during the elections for town council, I was gratified to see candidates of every political persuasion pledge allegiance to the idea of protecting rural character. It seemed to be, in our divisive culture today, the one thing that everybody, at least in Little Compton, could agree upon. And this great exhibit here reminds everybody who's not a farmer how vital farmers and farming are to preserving that rural character. Over the last 35 years, the Little Compton Agricultural Conservancy Trust has invested $26 million of our tax dollars, most paid by people who are new to town, to protect more than 2,000 acres of farmland. That is a really unique, incredible achievement for which we should all be thankful. And it preserves a lot of sites for future farming, but by itself it doesn't guarantee a future of farming for Little Compton. I know this because I had the privilege to go to high school in one of the prettiest rural locations on the eastern seaboard, the Brandywine Valley of northern Delaware, gorgeous rolling hills that at the time back in the early 80s was a time of farms. And in the 50 years I've known that locale, thanks to a lot of good work of conscientious people and land trusts, they've preserved the land, but nobody bothered to preserve the farming, and it disappeared. And what I can tell you is that when the number of farms in any location falls below a minimum threshold, the ecosystem of mutual support necessary to sustain farming disappears. The first thing that happens is there aren't enough farms to keep the feed store in operation, and it goes. And next to go is the one guy in town who knows how to repair any kind of farm machinery, until ultimately there is no one left to cut and bale hay for the few last holdouts who are raising horses as lawn ornaments. You can't preserve rural character without preserving rural characters, plural. You take the farmer off the land and farmland ceases to be farmland. It's just land that in no time becomes smothered in a tangle of invasive vines as fields revert to woodland. And then we can all watch as Little Compton slowly loses its traditional landscape pattern of open farm fields bounded by stone walls. Do we have a critical mass of farming for Little Compton's identity as a coastal farming community to survive well into the 21st century? I would say it's at a tipping point that could fall either way. I think farming in Little Compton today is like a slowly burning fire that looks quaint and generates some warmth to the people around it, but is at risk of burning itself out unless we find a way to throw some new logs onto the fire. So what will it take to do that here? I'd like to offer 4 things specifically. The first is there's got to be a shared vision and agreement in the town's next comprehensive plan for what it will take to preserve farming in this community. We could look west of us and borrow from the Aquidneck Land Trust, which has surveyed the entire island for where clusters of farming should be concentrated on the map in the future so that ecosystem of mutual support survives. Their plan prioritizes which private farm parcels deserve preserving with public dollars according to criteria that are agreed upon in advance. And the great thing about this is it avoids future land use disputes when you put it in writing and when everybody knows what to expect from the future. If a new prospective farmer were to come to Little Compton and were to ask, where is the best place in Little Compton for me to put my operation on the map, would today's town officials know how to answer the question? Second, this plan has got to include a way to recruit the next generation of farmers. Today across Rhode Island, almost half of the new farmers going into farming are not people who inherited land from their family. They are young people, like my daughter who's about to go into college, looking for good land to farm in a good climate with a long growing season, with proximity to dense urban markets like Providence and Boston. We have all that here in abundance, and there is no shortage of people out there looking for the opportunity. If we could lure some of them here, they would have, the next generation of farmers might have more in common with the first generation Portuguese farmers who came here in the 19th century to start a new life and put down roots. We could borrow from next door to the east, where the Westport Land Conservation Trust over the last 8 years has helped to create 4 new farm enterprises. One produces farmstead cheese with a herd of dairy goats. Another is growing blueberries. All of these farms have been placed back on the tax roll, and the land is being cared for by private owners instead of having to be maintained at town expense. And because of all of these conservation dollars were funded with public tax dollars, they do all of these through an open request for proposals, competitive bidding process where anybody is able to enter. And it gives the town the option to choose who will be the best steward of the land with a farm model that'll be welcomed by the town. And if we did that in Little Compton at the rate of 1 new farm every 2 years, we could add 5 new farms just by the end of the decade alone. Third, this plan would have to address where a young farm couple is going to live in a town with few starter homes. If we're going to preserve farms of any specific size, we've got to make allowance for where a farmer can live on it in the future. Unfortunately, in most instances, we're not doing that here. In the Hudson Valley of New York, which is another beautiful locale, it's very desirable among summer people where their real estate is just as expensive as ours. Towns will allow a new farm couple to erect a barn where the first story is used as the workspace and the living quarters are upstairs. I was talking about that with Michael Steers, who I see is here. Michael chairs our town's planning commission. And Michael informed me that that would be illegal here in Little Compton under the zoning code. So the irony is, here in Little Compton, it's legal to build a 1-story ranch house out of brick on a 2-acre suburban lot, but we can't allow a farm couple to build a work living space in a barn that looks like it's always been here. Maybe it's time for us to revisit our zoning code to see how friendly it is to preserving rural character. And the fourth and final thing that's really critical is consumer demand. Where you spend your household's food budget is going to determine what the landscape around you looks like in the future. The more produce, the more eggs, the more honey, jam, cheese, meat, and trees that you can buy from your neighbors means the more your neighbors that will be able to continue to farm land here in Little Compton. And with climate change and catastrophic weather events, pretty soon I think we're going to have to start asking ourselves, how long can we rely here on the East Coast on California's Central Valley to grow all of our food? To survive in the future, everyone might have to become a farmer once again, and the future may look more like the past when everyone was a part-time farmer. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. The future of farming is going to be different from what we grew up with. It's always been this way. As this exhibit shows, it's been true for generations, with farming always adapting to changing market conditions. I would venture that the future here in a location where the farms are small means farming less commodities sold through middlemen and more direct to consumer and more farm to table. And in locales like this, championed by chefs in nearby cities like Providence and Boston and at institutions like Johnson & Wales. So will today's generation of farmers in Little Compton be our last? Communities have choices. They can accept the future they get handed to them by somebody else, or they can work together to create the future they want to leave to posterity. And the final story that this exhibit tells to future generations is really up to all of us and what we do today. Thank you.